Okay, so I want to welcome everyone to week 14. This week's xEssentials presentation is Setting Up a Show Network by Tom Stallings, aka the Solutions Architect. This topic, a little bit controversial. There's a lot of different ways to set up a network. So Tom's going to show you the optimum way to do it and address any of your questions along the way. So after the presentation, I want to remind everybody that there will be a special announcements for xLights around the world. So stay tuned. So Tom, you've got the floor.
All right. So my name's Tom. Just go ahead and give you a little bit about me. I have only been doing the show network for, this is my second year, but as far as IT, I've been in the IT world for about 20 years. Specifically, I've been doing switching and routing for over 15. I do own and operate 3 businesses. 2 are IT, 1 is Medicaid. Don't ask. I did just recently complete my MBA IT. I have a whole bunch of expired certifications, like I'm sure everybody else does on this call, but I was an MCSE at one point, CCSA, CCNA, all those type of mumbo jumbo. Troubleshooting is actually one of my expertise. A lot of companies call my company to come in and help troubleshoot some of their networking and server issues that they have going on. We do design, major data centers and corporate networks across the U.S. And here recently, we've done a couple in Brazil. A few disclaimers. I may be an engineer, and what we're going to talk about here is my opinion. You can use it if you would like or not. I am trying to keep this as dummy down as I can. I'm trying not to get technical at all. If I do, then just let me know and I'll try to dummy it down for you, because it can get very technical on a mathematical standpoint when it comes to IP addressing and especially networking. I do hate website coding. So I know everybody knows I've been doing a couple websites for Biscoyo and a couple others. And I just wanted to put on there that I kind of hate it at the moment because it's a lot of work. So Ken, you'll appreciate that one because I know you love it too. If you're an engineer and you definitely do networking, you should not be on this call because there's going to be some stuff that I go over that I would not do in my working life, but doesn't mean it will not work in a show network. So we'll try to keep that. I also want to keep this as open as possible. So if you have a question, please, and I'm sorry, Jordan, you told me to record and I forgot to. Let me go ahead and hit that real quick. All right, there we go. So if you have questions or want to answer something or you want me to re-explain something, just let me know in chat, and Ed and whoever the other co-hosts are can stop me if they want. So let's dive into it. So what are we going to cover? So we're going to cover what is a network, what is a show network, do you really need it, can I operate 2 networks from one network, and maybe a couple of network setup examples and why they would work or don't work. Actually, kind of the ones I have in here, they would all work. You would just pick the one that you would like. A couple tricks of the trade that you can do to keep it simple, and really we're going to be discussing layer 2 and layer 3. No, we're not talking about ace of cakes or anything like that. Layer 2, and I'll go ahead and pull up this next slide because it's kind of make a little bit more sense. Layer 2 is your data link layer, and layer 3 is your network layer. So when you start talking with the network engineers, they want to talk to you on specific layers. Number one, is it physically connected? So your first layer is your physical connection. So is it plugged into the ports? If you ever talk to somebody on help desk, they're like, can you verify that you have link on the port? Can you verify that you have an Ethernet cable going from your PC to your switch? And that's kind of how they start their troubleshooting, is going through the easy stuff first and then working their way up. So I won't go into all of these and what they all do, but the layer 2 is basically a switch, a NIC card to a switch. And then your layer 3 is your routing. So your router's involved at this point. Couple caveats here. Just because you're on a switched network, and you'll see why when we get to it a little bit later, doesn't mean it's not layer 3. but it will act as layer 2. So remember that. We'll kind of touch base on that here shortly. So what is a dedicated show network, and what are the advantages and disadvantages? Advantages, I put in here, most people's wives love Netflix, and all the traffic that's on the show stays over on the show side. And some people believe that, if you're running your show network across your routers and switches and stuff like that, that their Netflix is crap, or your son or daughter's gaming is not that great, or anything like that. The other thing is they're pretty simple to set up. They're easy to manage, and troubleshooting is pretty simple, and testing is easier with a dedicated show network. Actually, I think this slide is a little off. So it is not simple to set up. It is easy to manage, and troubleshooting is actually more difficult because you're operating off of 2 separate networks. You got your home network, and then you got your show network. And depending on how you set it up and how you get to it, will determine how easy the troubleshooting is. So if you do a direct connect from your computer to your show network, then that's a little bit easier. You can also go through your Wi-Fi, through the Pi, and we'll go through that setup here shortly. So what is a USB to Ethernet adapter? So this is getting into the different types of things that you could do with your PC without having to invest a lot of money. You can buy from Amazon or Walmart or any of those places a USB to Ethernet card, and the only caveats here is just to make sure that you get a pretty decent one, because there's a lot of them. They may say gigabit, or they may say 100 megabit, but they don't necessarily operate at that. So that's one of the disadvantages. And if your computer only has a USB 2.0, the max rate that it's going to support is 480 megabytes per second. The Gen 1, Gen 2, 3.1s, which are the blue ports that you see, and the red ports, those go at 5,000, 10,000, so way past what they support. The USB to Ethernet is like having a secondary network interface card on a computer. So you can have your home network on that, and then have your show network on the USB, and run a cable from your computer out to your garage, or out into your CG 1500 box with a switch, and be able to run everything from one PC. Obviously, it's cheap and convenient. So when you set up, you can also do the same thing with just one NIC card. So if you have one network interface card, you are actually you're able to add a different network to it. Now, this is where some of the other guys are kind of like, I don't know if I'd like to do that, but it does work. But there is a couple caveats that has nothing to do with show network. So if you were to do this on a regular basis and run a media server, your throughput coming back into your PC would be reduced because of the network overload. But since you're using E131 and you're pushing out for the most part, it's really not going to affect you. The other way, and I'm going to pull up some diagrams here so we can kind of get a little bit better understanding here. So layer 2 is basically a flat network. And so these are basically just switches, and these are your computers, or these can be your F16s, and basically everything's connected together. Everything sees everything, and it basically all communicates via MAC address. Ken covered this in his video last year, so I'm trying to stay away from going over everything he went over. So the MAC address is basically a identifier for a network. You could do this by kind of seeing how this works. If you open up a command prompt, and you can do this on your computer right now if you would like. ARP-A, this is basically all your IP addresses in your network right now, and all the MAC addresses. So if you're ever looking for the MAC address of your cameras, like I know just by IP addresses, these are some of my cameras. And then you can also tell by the MAC address, they're all the same type. So when switches, when they're communicating, for the most part, they are communicating via this MAC address. They're ARPing, what's called ARP, address resolution protocol. These MAC addresses, so that when you route traffic, it already knows how to do it so that it doesn't go back to the router. So that's important. Remember that if you can separate it physically and still keep it on two different networks, it will still function and not hit your router. You're trying to take away your traffic from the router, so that, because it's only got so much CPU and RAM and stuff like that. Going over a dedicated network over Wi-Fi. So this is your standard Wi-Fi, what you see most people do, and is they have their FPP. Their FPP connects all of their show network side, and then that is connected via Wi-Fi back to your home network. So the home network's just 192.168.1.0, and then your show network's 10.10.10.0. The .0 is just that it's that network. It's not anything special like an IP address. If I pull up an FPP, I have already set that up on FPP. So my WLAN for my Falcon Pi player is set up on the 192.168.1.221 off of my Wi-Fi. So this is my home network. On my Ethernet side, I'm going to run, and I actually don't do this, and I'll go into that a little bit later, but on the Ethernet side, I run 10.10.10.11, which is a totally different network. And then depending on the version of FPP you run, you used to not have to put the gateway in there. Some version you did, some version you didn't. So I just put it in here just to make sure it was in there. And as you can see right now, I am able to ping the show side, but I'm not able to see I'm able to ping the network side, but not able to ping the show side. So there's a couple ways to set this up, and this is going to go into the version of how the different network setups you can do. So this is the Falcon Pi player. So basically, if we pull up a command prompt, and with the command prompt, you always want to run it in administrator mode. And that was just a ding saying, okay. Always run in administrator mode so that we can do a route add. So this is the quick way to do it, just to test. It's not the recommended way to do it. So you do route add, and I want to be able to get to the 10.10.10.0 network, and its mask is 255.255.255.0. And I want to be able to get to it via the Wi-Fi IP, which is the 221, right? So really, you should put -P here, or minus capital P for persistent, but I'm not going to do that because I'm going to show you a couple different ways to do this. So if I were to hit enter, it says okay, and I go to route print, and I can see that my route is in here, right here. And if I were to pull up the ping window again, as you can see, I'm actually getting to it. So I'm able to ping the show side of the network. I do not have anything down the line, but if we want to do that, we can do that at a later time, later this evening. So I'm going to go ahead and take that out because I'm going to show you another way. The main way that I would recommend that you do it is actually going into your router. Go into your router and do it there so that all of your computers are able to get to it. The disadvantage here is when you do it just on this computer, if it reboots or even though the persistent route's in there, sometimes it falls out. You got to put it back in there, and only that computer can get to it. This way, if you do it on a router level, you're able to get to it from any device. So that's helpful when you're out there in the middle of the night and you need to get to something. Your computer is or your phone is able to get to it to reboot something or check a configuration or change it from 50 pixels to 48. So you see I lost my route here. And even though I'm a network engineer and I use Cisco's, at my home, I use Unify for everything. They're cheap, they're great, and they work well. really easy to manage too. That's what I kind of like about them. So in most routers, you should be able to add what's called a static route. You usually find it in the routing and firewall section, right? And this is the same way that you're going to set it up in most routers. You're going to give it a name. And the network you want to reach is a 10.10.0 network. And that's a /24, which is subnet, which is a subnet mask 255.255.255.0. I don't worry about distance. And the next hop is your IP of your Wi-Fi card. So you hit save. And evidently I didn't type it in right. So this is the recommended way. I would recommend you do it if you can from the router. That way any device can hit to it. It takes a little bit to come out for the routes to start to reply. But you should see that start replying here in a second. Here we go. So that's another way you can do it. We'll go ahead and take that back out because there is other ways to set this up. And that's not the right one. There we go. Stop it. There we go. So I'm just going to do, well, it took it away anyway. I was just going to clear the ARP so that it took it away. So as you can see, the route's back down again. So you can actually do this through Wi-Fi, but there's another way that you can do it. And this is where the USB to Ethernet comes in your secondary NIC card. You're basically taking the same concept, but you're keeping it all hardwired. And that's what's called a split network. So basically, you're going to take your PC, you're going to run that to a switch, and this is just how mine's kind of set up. Yours could be a little different. And then from wherever this PC is that's going to be running your X schedule, for instance, make sure that switch peels directly off into your show network. Let me explain this a little bit. When you do a split network, you want to try to separate it as much physically as you can, okay? Don't run your PC to your switch, back to your router, back to a switch out in the yard, because you want to limit the amount of hops that it's doing. But if you do what we like to call a hairpin turn from this switch to this switch, then they know how to get to each other via MAC addresses, even though they're dumb switches, or in other words, they're not manageable. Now, if you had a managed switch, you could do this with VLANs, and we'll get into VLANs, and I'll touch a little bit on that, but I'm not going to get into it too deep because Ken covered that last year. So all of your devices over here have their 10.10.10.0 network, and they are all able to run their show network, and xLights is able to push this through the switch directly over to here without hitting your show network or your home network, sorry. So if you had a bunch of devices over here with more switches, if you had a bunch of switches, let's see, why is that not there? There we go. If you had a bunch of switches and some gaming consoles, and that's all over here, by definition, when you're sending the traffic out, it is not going to go left, because it knows that the MAC address for this F16 or this FPP is sitting on this switch that is ARPing on this switch. So it knows to turn from left to right and to go here and back down to the device without affecting anything over here. Is this ideal? And would I do this in a corporate network or anything like that? Absolutely not. Will it work for a show network? Absolutely. Just because of the nature of how layer 2 switches work. Especially if you have managed switches, you can actually do IGMP snooping, which cuts down on traffic even more in broadcast. But we'll try to steer away from the technical side of it. So then the question is, when you set up your network, do you do unicast or multicast. Very controversial. A lot of people have their own opinions. A lot of network engineers have their own opinions. I would say my opinion is that I will always use unicast, and I will always use wired well over Wi-Fi any day of the week. Does that mean you cannot run your show network on Wi-Fi and push some stuff with the Pixie sticks and things like that? Well, of course. But I would recommend that if you're going to do that, that you're going to run it via multicast as much as you can. And the reason for that is if you have a bunch of Wi-Fi devices out there, and the problem with unicast is it's TCP, and TCP is where I say, hey, I'm 192.168, blah, blah, blah. I'm looking for this IP address. Here I am. That device is going to say back, oh, I'm over here. Go ahead and send me what you got to send me, and then I'm going to send it, and then you're going to tell me that you got it, right? So that's kind of what a TCP transmission does. It's basically hello from both sides, and that you received it. If for some reason a packet gets dropped, which happens in Wi-Fi quite often, it's going to try to retransmit that, which may be okay. But if you have a lot of Wi-Fi devices and it's sending multicast out to all your devices, then it's going to start retransmitting again and then again and then again, because multicast is going to everything. What you can do there is actually overload your Wi-Fi device and the device itself, because you're sending so much traffic and so much regenerated packets that it just doesn't know what to do. And then that's when you start seeing stuttering and stuff like that. Depending on your device, sometimes it will bounce right back. Sometimes you got to reboot it. It just depends.
Can I just raise one question?
Sure.
Well, maybe not a question, but when we always talk about all this Wi-Fi stuff, we got to make sure people understand we're talking about data through Wi-Fi and not master remote through Wi-Fi.
Good point.
Because it's a major difference.
Yep. Good point, Jim. So there is a major difference, and I'm glad he pointed that out. And if anybody else wants to jump in and point it out, let me know. So what he's saying is that you can run a bunch of FPPs on remote mode and have a master somewhere that's pushing it out, and it's only sending sync packets over your Wi-Fi. So you can have a bunch of FPPs out in your yard, and it's only sending a sync packet to say, hey, I need to play this song. Here you go. Let's play it. And they all sync together and go like that. Sending your show data through Wi-Fi, which you do through Pixie sticks, and people do it with FPP too in bridge mode. That is actually sending the E131 data, which can overload a Wi-Fi switch, especially a Linksys router from Walmart or anything like that. It's not going to take much. And you're going to start seeing, stuff getting behind and stuff shuttering and stuff like that. So me personally, I try to run as hardwired as we called it. And because cable's cheap and you can use it the next year and stuff like that. But there are certain instances. I run my tune-in sign and actually my matrix off of FPP in remote mode. So it just gets the sync packet just because I can move it and I don't have to worry about running the line because I didn't know where I wanted to put it. So good point, Jim. Thanks for pointing that out. So on this same split network, let's go back to the hardwired piece of it. So what I've done is I've taken my show computer, which is here, and as we can see right here, I don't have Wi-Fi on. So I am only hardwired here. And if I go to IP config, I can see my IP is 192.168.1.204. I didn't know what that is. I was just showing you how you can see what that is. Okay. So again, you can kind of do the same thing here. You could say, I want to reach the mask and I want to reach it through my network card. And it is able to do that because it knows how to get there from previous, and it's already going there. So we're going to take that back out, maybe. And let that clear out. All right, so there we go. So this is kind of a trick of the trade. Another thing that you can do here, and I actually helped a couple people do this last year, because the problem with setting up your network through FPP or anything like that, sometimes if it loses its route and stuff like that, and you don't know how to get to it, or you want to be on your phone outside and your router doesn't support a static route, then you're not able to get to it because you can't add a route in your phone, or most phones can. I don't know if Androids can be hacked to do it, but you're not able to add a route. So unfortunately, when you're outside and you want to pull it up on your phone real quick, you're not able to do that. So if you right click on your NIC card and you go down to Internet Protocol version 4, TCP IPv4, and you go to properties, this is typically where you stop at. You're going to set up your static IP, you're going to set up your DNS, and then you're going to hit OK, and you're pretty much done. What I can actually do here is if you click on advanced, you'll see IP address. You can hit add. So I'm going to give myself 10.10.50, right? Put myself on the same subnet. Now this is the same NIC card. And I don't need a gateway, and I'm just going to hit OK. And hopefully we don't lose it. No, we shouldn't lose it. Now I am on the same network via wired from a computer that is on my home network, but is also, now this is my xLights show computer. And then what you can do in xLights is when you open up xLights, and I apologize, it's the first time I've touched my show computer in a while, so I'm probably on an old version. Yeah, I'm on .15 still. We're going to skip this time. So in xLights, you can actually go down and force local IP. And what the force local IP means is that I'm going to use that IP, assign the NIC card on that actual computer. So I'm going to use 10.10.50. Or sorry, 10.10.10.50. So once you do that, you can close it out. And when you open xScheduler, you can see down here that it is using this network. Now, it's still able to see these IPs, and that's just because I have both IPs here. But I haven't added the FPP here, so I would have to add it. Let's see. Should have thought about that one. We'll just add a remote here so you can see that it can see it. Oops. Duh. Might help if I just put the right IP. Okay. So as you see, xScheduler can get it. Now, if I were to reset all this up and put all this through, then you would be able to, obviously see everything on that network and still function on both. Is there any questions on that? Because I know that kind of loses people there. No? Okay. All right. So let's go back to the presentation because I'm sure I went way past where I was supposed to be at. This is why I don't do presentations, because I can talk for hours on this. Okay, so USB Ethernet, we talked about that. 2 NICs on 1 PC. Again, for a show network, you can add a secondary NIC card, and now they basically will be like having 2, and that really separates your network. They're really cheap, especially if you have an older desktop computer. You get a PCIe secondary network card, slap it in, power it up, and now you got a whole different network card. You still have to go through xLights and do that dedicated IP piece, though. We kind of went over this. So can you operate 2 networks on one NIC card? Absolutely. You can have a show network on a flat network because of the architecture of how switches work. And then you want to physically separate as best you can. We talked about that, and just keep it simple. So let's go on to VLANs. I'm just going to touch on this for a second. VLANs are a virtual local area network. There's switches, the new routers and switches are starting to allow you to do this, but I don't think it's there yet. Unify allows you to do VLANs at your house, and what a VLAN does is it takes, so your home network is a broadcast domain. What a VLAN does is separates not only the traffic, it separates the broadcast domain. So you make your broadcast domain smaller. So you can have cameras on VLAN 100. You can have, I really recommend for you security guys, I know Bill Porter touched on it and Russell touched on it, LOT devices, the whole Alexa and stuff like that. You should put those on its own VLAN so that the traffic is only on that VLAN and you're controlling what has access to that. Because there is VLAN spoofing, or I'm sorry, IoT device spoofing, where they can actually take control of your stuff at your house. And, there was a big malware that came out last year that affected a lot of devices. So virtual or VLANs actually separate your networks so that they can't intermingle. However, you can make VLANs intermingle if you want to at the router level. That is your call. So if you want your 10.10.10 network to reach your 192.168 network, you can allow it to do that, but you can also not allow 192.168 to reach your 10.10 network. So a lot of banks and hotels and stuff do that so that they're able to go across networks, but not necessarily allow people back on it, like a security network. So a VLAN is assigned to a device. Now, most devices that you're going to have at your house do not accept programming a VLAN. A lot of the NIC cards coming out now, you're allowed to put a VLAN on it. I don't know if Ken has any ideas on it, but I've never really gotten it to work. You could try to VLAN tag it, but it's in and out. So I don't think it's there yet as far as a home network NIC card assigning it a VLAN. What you can do on the switch port level, which a managed switch port level, is assign it an access port. So what an access port is say, I'm VLAN 100, I'm going to come down to this port and I'm going to open it up like it's a native port to that network. So in other words, the computer that's plugged into it doesn't know it's VLAN 100. It just knows that it's on that IP network. What is an access? What is a trunk port? A trunk port is basically, so if you're taking it from one switch to another switch, you're creating a trunk. You're saying, I'm taking VLAN 100, 101, 102, 103, putting it all together, and I'm going to send it across this link to go to another port, and then I'm going to undo it on the other side and, control that my camera's on this port, my PC's on this port, my Honeywell AC remote thing is on another port. So the other thing that people like to ask is, can I hack a trunk port? Absolutely. Anything is hackable if you know what you're doing. So I remember when I was in school my first time, one of the teachers said the only safe computer is a computer that's powered off in a concrete block with 10 million pounds of concrete in the bottom of the ocean. And then maybe at 10,000 feet below sea, it may be safe. So can you hunk a trunk port? Yes, but if it's set up right, no. Obviously, you don't want to do a native VLAN on a trunk port because people can plug in and figure out that it's a native, and if you got DHCP on it, which native means that it's able to talk to it without the actual VLAN number. I've been on many networks with people, network engineers didn't know how to set up their VLANs correctly, so they set up a native VLAN so that they can reach it on the other side, and that's a big no-no, and it just creates a big mess, but that's beside the point. So VLANs are able to separate traffic. It's done virtually. Trunk port kind of carries them all together. Access port is the end device, and you can hack it. I actually took this from Brian Hensley. I wrote him a Facebook message to ask if I can use it, and then I realized I wrote the wrong one somehow. So he never got back to me. But anyway, this is his diagram. It's actually a fantastic diagram. This is kind of showing that your Wi-Fi is going through your Wi-Fi USB stick, and this is obviously an older Pi because most of it's built in now. And then out to your Ethernet port, you connect your show network, and then more than likely you'd probably go to a switch right here in this area, and then down to your other devices. So credit to Brian. Brian, if you're watching this, sorry, but I wrote the wrong person. So questions. I know there's hopefully going to be quite a bit.
So the floor is open for any questions. Feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead.
Well, either I confused the heck out of people, or
one of the things you didn't talk about was using two routers. You talked about using a switch for the show, but you didn't talk about using a separate router for the show.
Why would you want to use a separate router? Would be my question.
Well, I did it because I had it, and also I was using it because I can't get Wi-Fi signal out in the yard to be able to connect up to stuff, like with my phone and stuff, to my house router because of where it's placed. I don't get good signal out there.
Okay. So I think what Jim's saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, so if you put a Wi-Fi router on your dedicated show network, in other words, it's not touching your home network, then you can use that as Wi-Fi out in your yard to connect to your devices outside.
And I also then put one of the little USB Wi-Fi on my desktop computer in the basement, and I can connect up to the show network from my desktop in the house.
Okay, kind of the same concept, but just you're doing it through the same concept.
Path. Yeah.
Yep.
I have a question.
Sure.
Why do people want to have their show computer connected to Wi-Fi or the internet, being that there's a chance of getting a virus or malware or spyware on their computer and crashing them?
So,
like I got two separate computers. I got one for the internet and one for my show.
Which you can do that, but most people do not have access to two computers, and they especially don't want to tie up one computer for most part. That's why people use Pis. I actually want to go back on a different point, and I'll come back to that question. How about that? So the other that I just remembered, why would you even do a show network? This is where I'm going to get a little controversial. To me personally, unless you're running well over 20,000 pixels, to me, there's no reason to run a separate show network just unless you want to. Traffic wise, Ken, correct me, was it like 410 universes, 105 megabytes per second at 40 frames per second? I mean, you got gig switches. So I don't know, a little controversial there, I understand, but
I think, Tom, to answer your own question,
yep,
is that there are still a number of people that probably don't have all pure gigabit switches. They may have a gigabit switch, but they may only have some, like 2 or 3 gigabit ports, and the rest are 10/100s. And that's where you start running into problems. As long as you have the equipment and everything's gigabit, you're fine. But if you don't, then you can run into issues.
Okay, I get that. Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah.
I'll throw it out there that, and I said this in mine, and I think you said it in yours earlier. If you're going to segment your show network onto your home network without doing any sort of like routing or anything, go buy a gigabit switch and put your whole show network on the switch and be done with it. Because a gigabit network switch costs $20.
Yeah.
And you can
absolutely. I mean, if you still got 100 megabit switches, like Ken's saying, I mean, they're $20. I mean, just upgrade them as much as you can.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to point that out, is because, people, a lot of times when they're setting up their show network, especially somebody just getting started, they're like, hey, I've had this switch sitting in my garage for 5 years. I'll use it. It'll be perfectly fine. Not realizing that, just go buy a new one for $20.
Agreed. Good point. And that's why I wanted to keep this kind of open, because there's a bunch of different scenarios to do it. And everybody's got their own personal preference of what they want to do. I ran 11,000 pixels, not counting my matrix because that was on remote mode, through my network that you just saw on the same home network, and I had 0 issues. However, I did physically separate it. So it goes from my PC to my switch that then goes to a switch that runs all of my show stuff. So I didn't have it going from one switch back to my router that went back to my garage that went back up to my attic. It basically goes from that switch directly to where it needs to go. And so it's physically separated in a way. So
would it be possible, Tom, just because I know when you were showing that, then you were showing your switch, maybe go back to that slide and kind of like deeper dive into it? Because is it from what I understand, I mean, I run managed switches. I don't know everybody does, but if somebody doesn't specifically have a managed switch, just kind of clarify that if you have a regular $20 switch, you can do the same thing and it's perfectly fine and have it separate through, or is there anything else that somebody needs to consider?
I think that was actually a diagram. Let me go back to...
No, you had the diagram on it.
You talking about this one?
Yeah, this one.
Yeah. Yeah, so this basically runs up into a actually my switch is a managed switch. Again, I run Ubiquiti, so I have a bunch of those 8-port Ubiquiti switches. Anyway, so you basically put your gigabit switch here in front of your PC, and then that needs to run to your show side, right? You want to try to, as much as you can, physically separate this, even though you're still running off of one computer. You're still running the split network going left for your home stuff, and then your split network's running right for your show network. If you have to run a show network and didn't want to spend the extra money or had an extra PC. So the split network is not something you have to do. It's just a way that you could do it. I can't remember who I helped last year, where they had it set up like the Brian Hensley. Well, that didn't work. Let me go back to that one.
I'd be curious to know how many people run a separate show computer with no internet connect.
Actually, Ed Smith does. Ed?
I
just do what I'm told.
Ed did, but we switched them last year at the end.
I don't think that people can't afford them an extra computer, because I got my computer, which is, it's not bad, but it's not probably the best either. But I only paid $50 for it on Let Go.
No, I mean, no, that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with running a show network. I'm just trying. A lot of people, especially last year at the end, were like, no, you got to run separate network. You got to run separate network. And I'm like, well, how many pixels are you running? Oh, I'm running 6,000 pixels. 6,000 pixels is not going to affect your home network unless you've got hubs and 100 megabit switches that are all in half duplex mode. So it's just until you get up into, I would say 15 to 20,000 pixels, I have no desire to separate my network. And I'm a network engineer, if that tells you that I don't want to deal with the hassle of it.
It also goes to the fact that if you're running everything unwired, in my case, I have way more than 20,000 pixels, but I run all master remote. So I have no data going through wires.
Right.
I have a Pi connected to every controller. So.
Yeah, you run what, like 22 Pis, I think?
No, I got, in fact, I got 12 of them connected up right now in the house because I'm doing an update to everything.
Yeah, those updates are killing me. I've actually held off on updates this year because they're coming out pretty quick on both sides.
I wanted to try out play with the new FSeek formats and the threaded stuff that's going on. So
yeah. I see a question. So John D asked, what if you set your routing both PC and what if you set the routing both the PC and the router does that cause any issues? So it shouldn't, John, but depending on the router or the PC, you could see something. It's just kind of like when people connect a router to another router and let it give out DHCP and you're doing double natting. I've seen it work for 10 years, and I've also seen it break in 3 seconds. It just really depends on the type of equipment. I love people that run double natting. Yes.
Tom, I got a question. Using wireless adapters, extenders, I have problems with the bandwidth cutting back down on the Wi-Fi part.
Yep.
Is that normal?
Yeah. So most Wi-Fi extenders, what they do is they create a backbone connection, right? The problem with that is it takes away from the bandwidth of your actual Wi-Fi. So unless you have a higher end Wi-Fi that does MIMO, what you're basically doing is if you got a 300 megabit Wi-Fi device, which we know will never run 300 megabit Wi-Fi, it basically cuts it in half. So the max you're ever going to get out of your device side would be 150 megabits per second. Again, that's a perfect world. UDP traffic and nothing in the way and perfect signal and stuff like that. So you're only going to get 60-50.
Yeah, I got 150 megabit backbone, but I'm only getting about 25 to 35 off the Wi-Fi.
Yeah, and that depends on your computer. I mean, is your computer connected up on 2.4 or 5 gigahertz or?
I did 2.4, and that's where it was. Once I did 5, because it was closer, it went up about 80.
Yeah, and that's just the limitations. Usually 2.4 is only 54 megabytes per second max. And then the wireless end, depending on which version you're running, is anywhere from 150 to all the way up to, I think the latest is up to 2.4 gigs wirelessly now, or 2.1, I think. Okay. Which is funny. Jeff, got a question? Jeff. Going once? Going twice? Oh,
all right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry, I had my house phone going, but I had to unmute on the PC. So I'm running a Netgear 10100. I got a Pi and 2 F16s. They're all connected through that 10100 switch. 7,000 pixels. Do you see any issues?
No, but at your earliest convenience, which Switch is so cheap, I would definitely put it up to a gig. Even though your Falcon is only 100 megabits per second or a 100 meg port, remember that even though it's a 100 meg port, it's full duplex. So it's 100 both ways at the same time, or one way, right, both ways at the same time. So it's really 200. So I would upgrade that to a gig because it's so cheap. You know, Amazon's going to do their Amazon sale here shortly. You'll get them for like $8 on Day, so.
Okay, super. Thank you.
Yeah. So any other questions?
So I have one last question, Tom.
Sure.
In your diagram here, switch going to another switch for the garage and the yard switch, how does the other switch, unless it's being given a specific IP address, know that that switch is set for 10.10.10.10.0 without potentially a router between it?
So a managed switch will know because you're going to put it on a network. A dumb switch will not know because it only cares about MAC addresses. So actually, the layer 2 switches, or the dumb switches we call them, those do not know what IP addresses are. They only go by MAC address. So
is the one you're highlighting now with your pointer a managed switch?
In this diagram, no, it's a dumb switch. It goes off of MAC addresses, and there's nothing I did not do any managed switch diagrams just for that reason.
Okay.
Because that puts in a whole different ball game. Now I can kind of show you a managed switch if you want to see one. Let's see.
I have them. I was just saying it for other people just so they could get an idea.
Okay. Well, yeah. Okay. The other thing I want to add, and I forgot to put it, which is usually the first thing I talk about, documentation of your network is absolutely crucial. If you do not make a network diagram of your network, you're going to run into issues and it's going to be impossible to get help. Everything I run is always documented. I know John Spiker, who was talking, he documents everything. I've seen a couple of his diagrams, and I'm sure Ken does, even though we probably don't update them as much as we should. Try to create as best diagrams as you can. I'll show you a couple examples that, I've done. Just simple diagram. This has nothing to do with show a network. This is just some of my, this is like my data centers and how they're connected. And I got 40 gig waves between them all and stuff like that. But when you come to actually documenting, and this is just an example of a shelter that we've done, we document how everything's connected, which ports, their MAC addresses, the IP addresses, the passwords, stuff like this. When you need help, as best as you can, you don't really necessarily have to put MAC addresses or serial numbers or anything like that. But knowing that port 8 is going to an F16, port 9 is going to FPP, and port 10 is going to this, and that this switch is a gig and this router is a gig, and but down here this is running 10 gig ports and stuff like that. Really helps you from a troubleshooting standpoint. So if you can document as much as you can, as far as how your network's set up, because it's so much easier for someone like myself or Ken or Alex or any of those guys on Zoom to troubleshoot, because we can look at it a lot quicker. So it's good to document when you're setting it up.
Okay, are there any final questions for Tom?
Hey, Tom, I got to say, I don't have a network diagram because I don't have any network, a wired network, but I have a spreadsheet that shows every piece of information about every PI, IP addresses, WLAN, what they're connected to, everything. So same thing, document.
Yep, absolutely. Especially when it comes to universes, xLights got the export models, which kind of puts everything there for you.
Yep.
Document all your IP addresses, especially your IP addresses. But if you start running a show network and you're doing it through Wi-Fi and stuff like that, document how that's all connected up. Really helps for two reasons. It helps us troubleshoot. Number two, if FPP crashes or your computer crashes or something like that, and you don't remember what IP address you set to it, then you're going to be in a world of hurt and trying to remember what it is. As far as it coming to like a Falcon, defaulting out or something like that.
Okay, any final questions before we close it out?
You used the term ARP a little while ago. What is that?
Address Resolution Protocol.
Can you explain that a little further?
Yeah, so ARP is just basically the MAC address. So it's let me pull it up. Each device must have a MAC address, especially when it comes to IP address. And ARP resolution is just saying that basically the CO2CFE is assigned 1.251 address. So from a switch perspective, to what John's saying, if it's connected over here to port 8 of this switch, then the switch knows that the MAC address is on this port, and then it knows that this port 1 is the uplink port, and all of the MAC addresses that this switch sees, whether it's devices or another switch, comes to this port. So then when this switch needs to know that the MAC address is over here, then it'll come over here and say, hey, no, you're this way, and then it's going to come down to the device where it needs to go. I hope I explained that right without getting too technical.
Yeah. So Tom, how many switches can you put in a line without it giving a problem?
Well, they change it all the time, and they recommend the 5-4-3-2-1 rule, which is basically.
So you get your main switch and you got a couple out in the yard. It doesn't matter, right? As long as they're
No, it really doesn't matter. I mean, because you're not running a bunch of MAC address. Where you get into the problem is if you have a lot of devices on every switch.
Right.
The device can only handle but so many MAC addresses. Like a Cisco is, a typical Cisco is like 4,000.
Yeah.
Or 16,000. I'm sorry. That's VLANs. VLANs is 4,000.
I don't think I'll have that many controllers.
No. No.
Tom, going online, be it Amazon or eBay, is there a switch that you would suggest getting?
So I'm going to refer to what most people say is it's really personal preference. I personally, in my home network, I run all Ubiquiti, but it's a little bit more expensive from a consumer standpoint, but it's not commercial grade. Commercial grade in my networks that I take care of is all Cisco. I don't use HP. I do use some Juniper routers, some Cisco ASAs and stuff like that. But when it comes to home network, I run just all Ubiquiti because it's got the nice unified network program that everything connects to. And, you know, if I have an access point go down, I plug it in and it reconfigures it in 2 seconds. So I
$40, $80 for something like that, or higher?
Let me show you what I use. Let me.
Cheapest Ubiquiti is like $80.
Yeah, and it really depends on the version you get. So I have a bunch of the. I'll show you what they are.
Yeah, one thing while you're looking that up, I want to add one thing about adding switches. Just remember that every time you add a switch between, say, your show computer and your prop, that's an additional point that can fail within your show.
Yeah. So I run these switches right here because they're all PoE. These are a little more expensive. They're not that expensive. You can get them off Ubiquiti pretty cheap. Let's just go to UBNT. I run the tough switches because I run tower sites, so I have a bunch of extras. Let's see. Unify. Everything's managed together. So that's pretty why I love it. You basically just plug it in. This is one of their big switches here. So if we go to their store. Did they take away the store? No, they didn't. They just moved it. So let's see. I think they are those are the routers. What's everybody use Ubiquiti wise besides the tough switches? Anybody got one they use?
Yeah, I just use the US 8. I think they run about $110.
Yeah, I use US 8.
And then I think the 24-port non-PoE version is like $249 or $299.
For my show, I just use cheap Linksys ones.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think I got like a cheap TP link gigabit.
What do you guys recommend for anyone who's not a network engineer and doesn't want to set up a controller in their house?
Yeah, I would personally. I've always loved the Linksys switches, but D-Link is not bad. TP-Link is not bad.
Set something up on Amazon so people have a link.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I've used all of those too, and they're just fine, and they're not. That Ubiquiti switch is more money than my good router.
Yeah, the ASUS routers are pretty good, and they have a VPN as well service, or they have a DNS service too.
Yeah.
Well, like Tom, I recommend your main switch is a gigabit switch if you run Pies or panels like,
Yeah. So this is what I would use because I don't know. I'm kind of partial to Linksys for some reason. I don't know why.
Well, doesn't Cisco own Linksys now?
Yes. So But I've always used Linksys because DDWRT.
Yeah, I've used them too.
So $24. Here you go. Here's a 5-porter. 8 porters, $49. Honestly, go with the 8 porter if you can. They got 24 porters, and then you get into the 48.
Okay. So, okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it, Tom. Great presentation. I learned quite a lot today.
The xLights project exists because of people like you. Help continue the project by making a donation today at xlights.org/donate.